I ended up going to the GP for something completely unrelated, and then she just said to me, "Are you okay?" And then I just lost it.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, the podcast where I have a candid conversation with someone who has a big story to tell. It was 2018. It was late at night, and Melissa Hopkins was sitting up in bed. She was about to reveal something deeply personal about herself to the world on LinkedIn, of all places, where it would be seen by thousands of people who knew her professionally. It was something she'd been suffering with for over 20 years, but had never spoken about publicly. But for reasons she can't quite articulate, on this night, she just felt it was time. So Melissa took a deep breath and pressed send. And this was the message she sent out into the world.
Are you okay? Well, thank you, I am. So in 2018, I chose to share my deepest, darkest secret to my large LinkedIn crew. I suffer depression, and I suffer from a rather severe variety. It is not something I have felt comfortable sharing publicly, and certainly not in a professional sense. Perhaps I'm scared I will be judged or be used against me at my core, but mostly terrified it will validate every self-doubt I have.
What happened next really surprised her. Melissa is the head of consumer marketing at Optus, which essentially means she's a very important person in an enormous company. But almost nobody who knew her through work realised that Melissa had been suffering from severe depression since she was a teenager. It was something she didn't talk about publicly in case people's perceptions of her changed, either as a person or as a boss. But on the eve of Are You OK Day in 2018, a suicide prevention day in Australia that aims to start conversations about mental health, Melissa decided to speak out. And since that moment, her life has improved in ways that she couldn't possibly have predicted that night. Melissa is an everyday woman who has lived a very interesting life, and her mental illness is just one small part of that. Like so many people living with anxiety and depression, Mel has always seen her depression as a weakness and something she should hide away. But she doesn't want to do that anymore. She shouldn't have to do that anymore. So today, on Are You OK Day, I wanted to share our chat with you. Here's Melissa Hopkins. Mel, 18 years ago, you left Australia. Why did you?
For love. So I'd sort of travelled and spent some time abroad. I'd come back home to Australia. And I think I still was sort of kind of itchy to go back overseas. But
what did you do for a job then?
I worked for a great advertising agency called George Patterson Bates.
And what did you do there?
I was an account manager.
What does that mean?
I basically did all of the client relations and management. And I worked, oddly, on Optus, which is where I am now. And I went over on a holiday to sort of catch up with some friends, and I caught up with an old friend and 4 pints of Kronenberg one evening, and one thing led to another, and yeah, he flew out to Australia 6 weeks later and popped the question.
What?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you said he was an old friend, so you knew each other already?
Yes. So
How did you know each other, Mel?
he was incredibly good friends with my ex-boyfriend. So, but it's all kosher. Ex-boyfriend had dumped me. I was obviously heartbroken. And Richard and I always got on really well. There was always a bit of chemistry. Nothing had ever sort of happened. And yeah, I don't know. It was just that irritating thing when your mum says, you'll know, like when you've met the right person.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll never know. And yeah, I just knew that I'd met my soulmate. It was amazing.
That moment when friendship turns into something else, can you pinpoint when that was?
Oh, look, if the truth must be known, the minute I got off the plane where my boyfriend at the time was collecting me, Richard had driven him to the airport. And as we were walking through, I was obviously really excited to see my boyfriend. But I saw Richard, and in the back of my head it was like, he's not bad. So I think there'd always been something there, and it always been kind of respectful. But we were very comfortable in each other's presence. So I think when we caught up again, there was no airs and graces. We had a few drinks, and I just
How
remember,
long after that time did you catch up?
12 months.
Yeah, right. And in that time you'd broken up with his friend.
Yeah, busted up with the boyfriend. But yeah, 12 months. 12 months.
And not to harp on it, but who told the ex-boyfriend that, hey?
Well, it was really awkward because Richard was still working with him. So Richard shared the news.
How do you share that kind of news?
And, ex-boyfriend and Richard sort of then it got a bit awkward and they sort of stopped hanging out as much. And then ex-boyfriend actually had been trashing me, not expecting me to come back to the country in his circle after we'd broken up. So it all got a little awkward.
I thought you were going to say, they had a duel or some kind of fist fight in the street.
No.
For your affection.
No, that certainly did not happen.
So the fact that Rich got on a plane 6 weeks later and came to Australia, that's not a lot of dating.
No, it's not at all. And I mean, look, his friends joke. I mean, it's bizarre because I am so not spontaneous in that sort of sense. But he asked me, I remember I'm drinking, this is so cliche, drinking Baileys in my pajamas, watching Sex and the City on the sofa. And he said, I think we should get married. So it wasn't this over-the-top romance. And I was like, you're bullshitting me. And he's like, no, we're going to get married. And I was like, you can't say this and take it back. And, this sort of went on. And Richard's like, I'm actually asking you to marry me. You're going to say yes. So there wasn't a lot of dating. And then Richard went back to the UK and it was all long distance, which was very romantic. It was, well before the likes of FaceTime and mobile phones were really expensive.
So you got to know each other slowly in a way?
We did, but we got to know each other, I guess, in a way that is slightly manufactured. He'd send me boxes of my favourite magazines and love notes and I'd do the same. And there was quite a lot of care and thought that went into that sort of early courting period.
Courting was the word that came to mind because I suppose when you couldn't see each other and there could be nothing physical, you had to sort of...
No, and I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't even think we had phone sex or anything like that. Like it was, like I missed him dreadfully, but it was good old-fashioned courting. And I would come home from work, and I'd be waiting for letters, or there'd be a parcel, and would speak on the phone, etc. But yeah, it was very, very romantic.
The decision to leave your career and move overseas to be with him. How did you come to that?
It was pretty easy, actually. Like I knew I wanted to be with him. I also was incredibly lucky to have one of the most amazing mentors in my career where the agency I was sort of set to be potentially sent abroad to the States, and I'd said I'd fallen in love and I wanted to move to London, and she saw I was great talent and she organised for me to be transferred over to the agency in London, which was just unbelievable, and it felt to me like all of my dreams had sort of come true. I met the man that I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And then career-wise, in my sort of, mid-20s, was being sort of packaged up and...
Fast-tracked.
Yeah, fast-tracked and sent across to go work in London. And, for me, even the fact I was flying business class and she was moving all my sort of small flat across was a really, really huge deal. So from a work point of view to start with, I was really lucky. I was set up. The most important thing for me is my career did not rely on getting married to Richard. As much as we got married quickly, I had a work visa. I was sort of independent.
You weren't the trailing spouse.
No.
Which is something that can put a lot of pressure on a relationship, can't it? If you go just to be with him and leave your own career behind. You didn't have to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never been the trailing spouse from a work perspective. I think at times I felt it from a family perspective because I'd given that up and they were at home, but never, ever, ever, never with work.
You immersed yourself in his family and moved into his mum's house?
Yes.
How'd that go?
It was interesting. So, Linda, amazing woman, and we actually had a really great relationship before we moved over, but, all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're living with your partner, and Rich lost his dad when he was young, unfortunately, to motor neuron around 14, 15. So Rich was travelling the world working in Formula One. He stayed at home and he sort of was the man of the house in that way. So I think coming in it became slightly awkward. Additionally, we'd never dated or courted, and then we were dating and courting, with his mum.
And the other stuff.
Yeah.
After not seeing each other for a long time.
No, absolutely. And I still recall the crappy old cane bedhead in the room above his mum. So, I think that actually started putting a bit of a dynamic on, because I didn't feel I could be just myself. And it's not because Linda didn't allow it, but I was on my best behaviour in my mother-in-law's to-be's home. And I think that certainly put a level of sort of pressure on the relationship. Absolutely.
After not living together before and suddenly being thrown into this situation, and you're in a different city, did you find that you felt kind of suddenly shy in front of him in terms of your body and how you looked? And I know we've talked about body image before. How did that play out?
Yes, that actually is really, really interesting. I've always had major challenges and still do with body image. I never, ever, ever had that with Richard, ever. So I felt most comfortable being naked with him, and I'd had even, ex-boyfriend prior whom I lived with. I'd get up and do my makeup in the morning before I came back into bed.
Oh, wow.
And Richard, I just felt so comfortable with. He very much got me and appreciated me for everything that I was. And I think for me, I at times tried to still push him away. And I'll never forget this evening where we were sitting on the end of the bed and I don't know, we'd had some argument about something. And he said, Mel, you can keep trying to push me away, keep trying to do it, but it's going to get boring because I'm not going anywhere. And I remember just being absolutely flabbergasted in the fact that I hadn't realised I'd been consciously doing it, but also this fact that play your games, but I'm here for you. That's not going to work with me. And I think in some previous relationships I'd probably self-sabotaged a little, but he very early on saw that. And I've always felt completely 100% comfortable with my body image with Rich. Yeah.
When did you get pregnant?
God, we've been married like 7-8 years after.
So quite a while.
Yeah.
Tell me about that time between arriving in London and then getting pregnant.
Well, career has always been really, really important for me. So I very much threw myself into my career. I think also for us, for our first 1-2 years, we actually then started dating. We sort of did it.
Yeah.
We did it back to front. And the first couple of years were really tough because we hadn't had that regular sort of interaction, living with each other, dealing with things. The romance and courting was heightened, and then you sort of get into your real world and real life. And, I learned things like British sense of humour is so different to Australian sense of humour. So, year 1 and 2, they were sort of tricksy, I guess. I think one of the other great pieces of advice I had was I had no family and I had some friends, but I was building up new friendships and Richard was pissing me off about something, and had gone to lunch with a girlfriend I worked with, and she sat down and she said, Mel, Richard's your husband. And I went, I know. And she said, but that's all he is. And I said, I know. And she said, no, you don't. He's not your mother. He's not your sister. He's not your best friend. He's just your husband. And I think you've been a little unfair because you're expecting him to play all those roles. And it was hard to take, but it was actually incredibly wise, because I do think that put a lot of that pressure early on in our relationship came from was from those expectations.
You needing him to be everything. And I think that's a mistake we often make when we're younger and in our marriages and in our early relationships. It's that idea of you complete me, or expecting someone to be everything for you, and
absolutely
not realising that you need to get lots of things from lots of other people. And I guess that's heightened with you being in a different country. Yeah,
and look, I probably put unreasonable expectations on him, expecting I've moved on to the other side of the world. So, of course, you'll play the role of my mother and my best friend. But look, we spent 7 years both doing brilliantly in our careers, travelling the world, which was amazing. I'd always said we're going to have kids. And I'll never forget it. We drove down to Italy, as you do, catching up with a friend, and we were in a place called Strasbourg in France, having wheat beer, and we both just said, do we actually really want to have children? And it had been unspoken, but it was odd. We both stared at each other not knowing. Richard's like, well, do you? And I was like, well, do you? And neither of us almost wanted to say, I'm not sure. And this conversation ended up coming out that actually neither of us were 100% sure. And we didn't know why. We loved our relationship. We loved our unit. So we ended up having a chat, and we worked out, look, actually, we really think we'll regret it if we don't give it a go. For us, we're just going to give it a go for 12 months naturally. I'd had a bestie that had gone through, pretty full-on IVF, etc., and I'd chosen that wasn't the route I wanted to take. And if it happens naturally, we'll have a baby. And if it doesn't, then that's a sign. And much to Richard's horror, 5 weeks later, I got pregnant. So I think he was hoping on...
I thought you were actually going to say, we decided, we'll give it 12 months, and if we don't like it, we'll just give it back.
We'll give it back. No. And then I'll never forget... Eleanor, who's my gorgeous daughter, when I told Richard I was pregnant, he said, you can't be pregnant. Richard travelled a lot working in Formula One, and he'd sort of tried to work backwards when I was pregnant. And he went, I was in Australia, you were in England. And I went, no, it's definitely yours. And then we worked out Eleanor was not conceived in a moment of passion. She was a travel shag. Richard was going away for 3 weeks, and she was the evening before he left me going, I better put out because hubby's going away. Hubby's going away for 3 weeks. And there Eleanor was conceived. So, yeah, God bless her.
And then when she was little, you took a job, an unexpected job.
Yeah, I went back to work. Eleanor was only sort of 6 months. And I was really, really, really lucky to get the opportunity to work with the British Army. And, they sent me to Afghanistan, which is not what you expect when you've got a little
6-month-old. How was the thought process of should I go, should I not go? How long was it going to be for?
It's 4 weeks.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think twice about it. So I think the opportunity was massive. And I mean, this was in a period and a time when, it was quite heavy combat in Afghanistan. I also spent a bit of time on that trip in Nairobi in Africa with the Army as well. So I knew it was a good opportunity. It was great for my career. So I sort of packed up and left. And it's weird. I didn't miss Eleanor when I was there, and I can remember feeling a little guilty about it. I'll be honest, I was loving the fact that young squatties were calling me a MILF. It was good for the ego. And I was in an environment that was so, so different to anything I'd ever experienced before in my life, and actually stayed with me since. But the moment the plane landed on the way back, and I was going back via Nairobi, and the tyres hit the ground, I couldn't get to Eleanor soon enough. I missed her terribly. But it is odd when I think I felt a bit of guilt around not feeling guilty about missing my child at such a young age. Plenty of other people tried to make me feel guilty around it.
And isn't it funny, because the question is, but who looked after her? Oh, she has another parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The default expectation is that what will happen to her if the mother's not there?
Well, yeah, and how irresponsible, you going to somewhere like that when your child's only sort of 6 months old, like where's your priority? But it was the best thing that I did at the time. Richard has always been a really crazy hands-on dad. I swear if he could breastfeed, he would have. He needed to be involved in everything. I mean, he was working full-time too. But it also, I think maybe it's not until I've got older that I've reflected back the importance of it's okay to have different compartments in your life as a female. Everything doesn't have to, merge in. And I was not a mum on that trip.
You stepped into a different identity.
Yeah. I was Melissa Hopkins that had a family at home. But no, I was definitely not a mum in that environment at all.
Last year you posted something in LinkedIn, and I'd just like to ask you to read it, if you could just read it.
Are you okay? Well, thank you, I am. So in 2018, I chose to share my deepest, darkest secret to my large LinkedIn crew. I suffer depression, and I suffer from a rather severe variety. It is not something I have felt comfortable sharing publicly, and certainly not in a professional sense. Perhaps I'm scared I will be judged or be used against me at my core, but mostly terrified it will validate every self-doubt I have. For the majority of my working life, it is something I've managed under the radar. It's had its ebbs and flows. It's had its debilitating moments, landing me in hospital and at times struggling to get out of bed. And yes, once an employer that had no idea on how to handle it. But I've now realised it is part of me, something with the right care around me I've learnt to manage, and indeed now appreciate how it's got me to the level professionally I am. It has made me a good leader and dogmatic about getting to the right outcome. So in 2018 and 19, I stand brave, be a little shaky that people's perception may change and my career trajectory may alter. I suffer severe depression. I also have an amazing career and I look forward to my future. Let's smash stigmas around mental health together.
What made you decide to write that?
I actually wrote it on a bit of a whim. I was in bed on LinkedIn and it was the day before Are You OK Day, and something just came over me that I didn't want to hide behind it anymore, and I felt that I needed to share it. So it wasn't overly calculated. It was pretty off the cuff. I think part of it for me too probably is sort of part of my recovery with depression. I was ready to share it. I don't know. I also think maybe mostly it is still massively stigmatised in the workplace, and I sort of felt safe almost writing about it in that forum, be it that it was also probably incredibly risky. So, yeah, it's amazing actually just reading it back. I almost need to print that out and stick it inside my wardrobe and read that every few weeks because, you sort of forget how far you come and what you've done and the stance you take sometimes, yeah.
What happened after you pressed publish?
I was absolutely blown away with the responses that I received off the back of it from colleagues I knew and many that were completely surprised and shocked because that, the Mel I know doesn't have depression. That in itself we can go back to, you don't wear a badge. So I wouldn't expect them necessarily to people I had never, ever met before saying they either weren't brave enough yet to share that or how inspirational it was. And, I mean, I think it ended up getting like 200,000 views or something. I was just absolutely flabbergasted and really, really blown away. And it actually, for me, it's funny how I talked about validation. It gave me the validation I think that I've been searching for my whole life, that I was actually able to do something good and give it out there, and just the response from people back was just outstanding.
When did you first realise that you had depression?
If I go back now, I'd definitely say in my early 20s there were signs, ups and downs, and actually probably in my teens there were signals, but you sort of push it off as hormonal and going through difficult times. And I always sort of went through dark periods.
When you say dark periods, were they times when you would cry? Were there times when you would not be able to get out of bed? What did they look like?
I think when I was younger, it wasn't not able to get out of bed. It was a huge lack of self-worth, not being good enough, and lots of invasive thoughts around that, and absolutely quite teary. And it was kind of odd because I was doing well in my career. I came from an amazing family. I didn't have any excuse to feel, any of those ways. But I think I sort of just pushed it down. And then there was a whole lot of other symptoms, and these all aren't necessarily linked to depression, but, huge issues around body image and this crazy obsession with what other people thought about me and how they reacted and responded, and hormones. It felt like hormones, all thoughts that would take over in my mind I couldn't control. It sort of came to a massive head in around 2010. Eleanor would have been 3. I actually had just started seeing a psychiatrist through a doctor because I've been sort of on and off on meds, and it just sort of had got to a period where it was dire. The invasive thoughts in my head, I'd have hundreds a day of just not being here anymore. I didn't think I was going to act on it, but it was there. It was taking over my life. I couldn't get out of bed. It was just dark. I didn't care about anyone else. Everyone says you should feel guilty about people you leave behind, etc. It just wasn't there, and I ended up being hospitalised in the UK off the back of that and sort of some certain circumstances that had happened. And I think that's obviously where I realised it had reached its toll, and it was hard being in hospital. I was lucky. I went to a private hospital, but you realise people that you look around and you all think that anyone suffers depression's either had really, really traumatic incidences in their life or is kind of a bit screwy, is so not the case, right? So some people have had terrible instances in their life that have triggered it, but it's filled with a whole lot of normal people as well. So I can say this now actually because he's not alive anymore, but my highlight of hospital was on the floor up from me, George Michael was staying there. God bless him. I shared a fag. He wasn't there for depression. I think he was maybe had other addictions he was dealing with, but that even makes you think, I'm there in my PJs and someone like that is, just sort of having a fag and sharing it. But
what do you do for depression when you're in hospital? Like, what does treatment look like? Or is it just about keeping you safe?
I think it varies. I mean, it's funny you talk about keeping safe. I mean, I joked even when I went in, oh, God, it'd be funny if I tried to kill myself because, the rooms are suicide-proof.
Cells.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, look, I had a nice bed and everything, but, the sheets, you couldn't move, you couldn't turn them. There was no, glass, locking doors, chairs, all of that was kind of weird. It depended, right? So rest, medication, you're checked on an awful amount of time, and then they work through, and there's just sort of different types of therapies, one-on-one therapies, group therapies, lots of talking, lots of reflection. I mean, I ended up even being sent off to a neuroscientist because I was just having really severe hallucinations and everything. So it's probably one of the best moments of my life, but also one of the worst.
Why the best?
Because I believe that depression had sort of been bubbling away and I hadn't been really willing to admit to it, and it was a moment where I could just finally say, okay, take me, other people look after me. I think the worst because it was going head into something that's complex that I didn't really understand, and why group therapy I think was fantastic. It also made me probably feel guiltier about the depression because a lot of people that I, was surrounded with had very traumatic sort of circumstances that had sort of brought it on. So
in your LinkedIn post, you talked about, I've flown it under the radar.
Yeah.
I've tried to fly it under the radar. When you were back in Australia and working in this very high-powered job, and I assume in London as well, how do you fly something like that under the radar?
Practice. You put on a mask. You just, you put on a mask. And actually for me at the end of London, and actually when I first came back to Australia, I'd sort of tried to self-medicate. I'd gone off all my medications and thought I was going to be fine, which was an absolute freaking disaster. And I crashed and burned over here. It was just so stupid.
Why did you think to do that? I'm always fascinated when people go off their meds because I've never wanted to go off my anxiety medication. Because I suppose if you have bad side effects, that's a reason why you might want to
absolutely, if you've got bad side effects. Because I believed that it was a weakness. I believed that depression was weak and that I could fix that and I could make it better. And, rationally you sort of sit there and go, there's all this science to prove that's not the case.
Is that part of the illness, thinking the stigma of being on meds, like your self-worth? And
look, I'm sure it's – I think maybe. I don't know if it's just the stigma of anxiety or depression because, there are plenty of people that, may be on drugs for diabetics, heart issues, chemotherapy that mightn't like to stay on drugs for a variety of reasons. but you discuss it. You know, having depression and actually having a depression from my view as a female moving up in a world where there wasn't many females, I was terrified it would be seen as a bigger weakness. So I don't know why I did it. I know lots of people do it. It was a dumb, stupid thing to do. But I wanted to fix it by myself because I just didn't want to accept it.
So then how did that end?
Well, I nearly went into, major hospital number 2 and was just literally caught in time. And it was funny. Richard even gets angry with it. All the signs were there. All the triggers were there. I wasn't sleeping. I was having night sweats. I was having dreadful, invasive thoughts. My moods were all over the shop. And I ended up going to the GP for something completely unrelated. And then she just said to me, "Are you okay?" And then I just lost it. And thank goodness from her was put in touch with an amazing psychiatrist that I still see very regularly here. He's just an angel for me and amazing. And, we've got back onto meds and I took time off and worked through it. But, I think I was more distraught and depressed about the fact that I'd sort of had a relapse.
Yeah, there's that idea that people often write about mental health issues in past tense.
Yeah.
So it's like, this happened to me and now I'm fine. And that's not the trajectory of most people's mental health. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 1 step back, and you're not necessarily cured.
No, and I think that the shitty thing about it is it comes and knocks you when you least expect it.
Yeah.
It really, really, really does. Am I glad that I've got it? No. I'm 40, just turned 46. I've sort of spent, from the age 12 on not liking myself, not thinking I'm attractive, not thinking that I'm successful, which is really quite sad. And, if anything like that happened to my daughter, I think I'd be devastated. I've started getting better about that now, but it's still not perfect. And I wonder if I'd got help earlier, would have that maybe changed some of it?
But some of those thoughts wouldn't have made those deep grooves in your psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of our writers here at Mamamia, Amy Clark, wrote recently about how depression sometimes feels like the uncool mental health issue, that like anxiety is, everyone's got anxiety and, it's associated with overachievers and hustling and going hard and alpha personalities, whereas when you have depression, sometimes you just want to cry and sometimes you can't get out of bed, and it's often associated with lethargy and lack of motivation.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that? Do you find that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I had a sort of a bit of a ding-dong with my line manager who's aware. He's amazing. But, I was really frustrated about something and I got off the phone and I went into an office and closed the door and started crying. Not because I'd had the ding-dong, but because I was going through a period where I was feeling really flat. And there's part of me screaming, going, "You don't have any idea how hard it is for me to get out of bed every morning and come in here and do this job and feel the way I feel." But then at the same time, I don't want him patting me on the back because he feels sorry for me. But, why can't I just say, enough, this is really, really hard for me at the moment. Work is a trigger for me. Change is a trigger for me. Work doesn't cause it. Circumstances cause it if I don't look after and do sort of self-care. The thing for me around mental health, so it's not that I think I've got a better mental health issue than you because yours is anxiety and mine's way cooler. Because actually I think they're all quite debilitating.
Horrible.
One of the girls in hospital with me that suffered really severe anxiety kept almost going into cardiac arrest because her body was just shutting down from what the anxiety was doing. So I think they're all
horrendous. It's a competition no one wants to
and
win.
I don't know if one's better than not, because I think for me with anxiety the risk is just exercise a bit more, Mia. Like, sort yourself out. Like, just chill. There's an amazing book.
Just smile, Mel.
Just smile. Smile through it. Read a self-help book.
Yeah. Meditate. Deep breath.
And all that stuff sometimes helps, but
Turmeric.
I've not tried turmeric. Is it good?
I don't know. I once spoke on a mental health panel in Byron Bay, and that was a mistake. It was at a writers' festival, and the number of people that came up to me afterwards and told me about turmeric. I can't even tell you.
Weed, I think, I wouldn't say no to, but, roll on California laws here. But
I want to ask you about self-care because you mentioned self-care. What do you do for self-care? Because I've got my medication, but then there are other ways that I manage my anxiety. What do you do to manage your depression?
A couple of things that sound really superficial, but I go get a facial every 4 weeks. And I notice if I don't do that, actually, it makes a big difference. So there's obviously something for me mentally that triggers, that is forced self-care, and it's something that I enjoy. Sleep is really, really important. Exercise is important. Actually knowing when I'm going into a wobbly period, actually just taking time out and, I'll spend a Saturday, with saying to my husband and actually indeed my daughter, Mummy's just not great today. I'm just gonna chill. That's really, really, really important. Oddly for me, talking about it is probably the best type of self-care, and I wouldn't recommend everyone just comes out and starts shouting about it because you've got to feel ready, but that has made me feel much better about it and pushing it to try to destigmatise it. But I've got a charity thing at work this month for cerebral palsy called September, which is an amazing, amazing cause, and it's brilliant. The entire organisation is getting behind it. And, we do lots of things for breast cancer, etc. But I'm like, we do mental health once a year. And that's not my organisation. That's so many because, again, it's actually not, it's not something people are willing to put their hands up and talk about, and it frustrates the hell out of me.
And I also don't know if it's something that can be fixed.
Well, no, and I don't know.
But I think awareness is so important. I mean, if you look at the difference, Mel, between, you and I have both been suffering with mental health issues for many, many years, in fact, decades. But things are very different in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And like when I had anxiety, was diagnosed, I didn't know anyone else, or I thought I didn't know anyone else. It turns out that there were loads of people in my life who have it and who suffer.
Yeah.
But now it's like things like miscarriage and depression and anxiety and all of those kind of issues, I feel like a lot of sunlight has been shone into those dark corners.
I agree. I think we've just got to keep talking about it and keep, pushing it. And I think the challenge with mental health is just how varied it is. And, I think that's the same with a lot of diseases, but someone can suffer from it through a period because they've broken up with a boyfriend or they've lost a loved one. Sometimes it can be just debilitating and they can't get out. Bipolar, schizophrenia, mild depression. I've got a quite severe depression and it's shit. And you and I have discussed this before, even me trying to sort of get life insurance from a life insurance company was, their view is my mortality rate is higher than that of someone suffering from cancer. Is sort of like, are you kidding me? That sort of stuff I think is really hard. But I think the more we talk about it, the better. The thing that scares me now at 46, going through perimenopause, is are all my hormones going to start triggering it off another world of,
Do you
depression.
have them like in terms of these bouts? Can you feel them coming? And how long do they last, or is it not predictable like that?
I should feel them coming and I should see them coming. No. And, my last bout properly was 7 months. And I only took off 4 weeks' work during that, right? So that was hard. I've got an amazing, amazing psychiatrist. She's brilliant. And I think my only counsel is if people don't connect with who they're seeing, it doesn't mean you've got to like them. Actually, you want tough love, but you need to find someone that you absolutely connect with. But no, it scares me because every time they seem to get worse. And, that's something that, particularly with the type of depression that I suffer from, that risk is going to keep getting higher. I'm scared, like, you don't give it to your children, but there's some views that it's maybe hereditary. I don't want my daughter to go through it because it's lonely and it's hard, and I'm so angry that there are moments in my life I should have, literally I'd be walking down Pitt Street in a bikini from the age of sort of 18 to 25.
Shouldn't we all have been doing that?
But, I wasted so many not liking myself. And I think everyone goes through periods of that, but just really loathing who I was as a person and then really dark feelings on top of that. I don't want my child to go through that.
At work, since you posted on LinkedIn, have you noticed that people's reactions to you or behaviour around you has changed?
When I first posted it, I had a couple of people reach out and just go, wow, can I do anything? Can I help? I had quite a few people really pat me on the back and just say thank you. And a lot of people share with me their sort of process, and either I'm here for you, Mel, or Mel, I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but I'm glad that you are. But no, I think, it was a moment in time and it's dropped, and I'm just Mel Hopkins at work, sort of, powering on through and smashing on through.
Unstoppable, except when you need to stop.
Yes, absolutely.
And have a facial. Which you must.
Yes, absolutely, with the LED light.
I like that LED light.
Yeah, no, I like
too.
a bit of a LED light facial.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah. Let's smash it together. I just want to thank Mel for being so candid about her experiences with depression. I know it's going to help a lot of people. I first spoke to her about it in an advertising agency when we did a sort of a Q&A in front of a whole lot of people. And it wasn't originally going to be a proper episode of No Filter. It was just something that we were going to do for the people in the room. But I heard her story and I saw the reaction, and so many people afterwards came and spoke to her and spoke to me and said how it made them feel seen and understood, that I just wanted to share it more widely. I think it's just so important that we share as women not just our successes but also our vulnerabilities and our struggles. If you are feeling like you need to talk to someone after hearing that, please reach out either to Beyond Blue at beyondblue.org.au, or you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. And most of all, please talk to your GP. That is always the best place to start if you think you might benefit from maybe seeing a counsellor or a therapist, or maybe talking about medication. Thank you for listening to No Filter. And if you're after something else on mental health to listen to, why not check out my episode with Dr. Jodie Lowinger about anxiety, called Anxiety? A Guide. She's an anxiety expert, and anxiety and depression are so often interlinked. So that's one that's really, really worth listening to. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman. You can find me on Insta at Mia Friedman, or on Facebook at Mia Friedman. And I will see you on Mamma Mia.